from the macro standpoint, I think the trial in and of itself is a miscarriage of justice, right? This trial should never have taken place to begin with. Both the U.S. Department of Justice, specifically the Southern District of New York, which is where Manhattan is, and the Federal Election Commission, both declined to take this case. And both of them had plenty of opportunity to evaluate the facts, the circumstances, the allegations, and both said there's nothing here. But that didn't stop the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, from deciding that, well, he was going to figure out a way to bring this case against President Trump. I think that's mainly because that was one of his big campaign issues, as is the case with New York Attorney General Letitia James. Both of them campaigned on this platform of they were going to, quote unquote, get Trump. So we start from that perspective at the macro level, that this is really a politically motivated show trial. And then when you start to get into the actual facts of the case, most lawyers on both sides of the political spectrum who have looked at this case have said and concluded it really doesn't look like the case is going to hold up under its own weight. There's very, very little evidence at all here, let alone any evidence of a crime. And then to the extent that there was anything untoward about the case, if it amounts to a crime at all, it's probably a misdemeanor at best. And in New York, under New York state law, the statute of limitations has passed long ago on bringing a misdemeanor. So this took a remarkable amount of political creativity by Alvin Bragg in order to bring this case to begin with. And I think that's the starting point that we all have to begin with and understand in terms of the context of the trial. And then you get into the issues with the judge, right? The judge's political ties to President Biden and his contributions to the Biden campaign, and then the unconstitutional gag order, and the list just keeps going. I laugh because I guess, DA Alvin Bragg takes the issue of business record keeping very seriously, but he apparently does not take the issue of violent crime very seriously. You can go down the list of violent crimes that have occurred in his jurisdiction, in Manhattan, in New York, and see the number of times he has either refused to prosecute somebody or he's given them the proverbial slap on the wrist. I saw in one case, it's a serial armed robbery suspect, or not suspect, but convicted. He's got a rap sheet of over 50 convictions. He spent time behind bars, and yet he did it again. And he was released on $1 bail. And then there's the infamous Alvin Bragg memo, where he announced there's entire categories of crimes that he refuses to prosecute as the DA, including selling drugs, including prostitution, including resisting arrest. So he's sending a very clear message to not just the people of New York, but the people of the United States. We talk about this two-tier system of justice, and people say, what is a two-tier system of justice? Well, you're looking at it. It's when the people in power, like Alvin Bragg, say, we're going to have one set of rules for some people, right? In this case, if you're a criminal, if you're a career criminal in New York and you get caught, the rules say, I'm going to decide not to do anything. I'm going to let you go. But if you are a political opponent of Alvin Bragg, he is going to do everything in his power to throw the book at you. And again, going back to this alleged record-keeping error, right? A bookkeeping error that nobody else would ever get prosecuted for. And even if they were, it would be a misdemeanor and nothing more would happen. They would pay a small fine or something like that and go on with their lives. But Alvin Bragg has decided in his own political judgment that he has tied this bookkeeping error to somehow it's magically converted into a campaign violation, a campaign finance violation, and that magically turns it into a felony in his eyes. And that's how we get to have this show trial. And so I think that's those are the dots that people need to connect. Is it's been politically motivated from the beginning. There's no evidence of a crime. And meanwhile, people in New York are fearful for their safety. I mean, gosh, just look at what's happening in New York right now as we speak. You've got these violent protests going on college campuses throughout the city, and nothing is happening to those protesters, right, who are tearing down these once hallowed institutions. And yet you've got a former, as you said yourself, the unprecedented criminal trial of a former United States president for something that no one else in the country would have this happen for. There's no there, right? There's no evidence at all to support that, to start with, right? And as a lawyer, I can tell you, lawyers, I'm sure you've heard it before, we're pretty famous for saying it doesn't matter what I believe, it only matters what I can prove, right? And so I'm going to be absolutely shocked if there's any way that Alvin Bragg can prove that without breaking the rules somehow, right? Without making up evidence, because there is no evidence of that. The fact of the matter is, this was a non-disclosure agreement. That's essentially what we're talking about, a non-disclosure agreement, which is a very common thing in business practice in this country, right? Where somebody comes into knowledge of information, right? And either, just through the normal course of business, and you ask them, hey, I would really like for you to not disclose that information. It could be for whatever reason. It could be business trade secrets. It could be to avoid revealing confidential or sensitive information. And you basically say, I'm going to pay you a certain amount of money in order for you not to disclose that. And so I think I just saw last week, there was a law professor. I don't know this law professor personally, but my guess is that he's actually probably left of center. But he wrote an op-ed or an article saying, look, hush money may be unseemly, but it's not illegal. It's never been illegal. You can pay somebody to not reveal information that they are in possession of, and it's perfectly legal in our country. And so for Alvin Bragg to say, well, the fact that she had information and President Trump was running for president at the time, and he asked her not to reveal it, he somehow magically converts that into a conspiracy to steal the election. I mean, that makes no sense. There is nothing wrong with asking somebody or even paying them to say, look, I'm running for office. There's certain things that I don't want people knowing. Maybe I got a speeding ticket or something, and you're aware of the fact that I have a speeding ticket. I will compensate you for not talking about that. This happens every single day in this country, not just people running for office, but people trying to run and operate their business. It defies legal sense and it defies common sense. Well, I actually think there's a third scenario as well, which could be a hung jury, right? Which I guess functionally is the equivalent of a not guilty, even though for lawyers, we would say technically it's not a not guilty finding. It's a hung jury. But because that is a possibility here, right? You could have one or more of the jurors that say, I just don't know, right? But to go with those two scenarios that you laid out, the first one, if he's found guilty, I predict he's going to appeal, and I predict he wins on appeal for all the reasons that I've just laid out, right? That this was a politically motivated prosecution to begin with. The judge should have recused himself. The judge should never have issued this gag order, or if he was going to issue a gag order, it should apply to everybody and not just unilaterally to one party, especially the defendant in the case, right? That's unheard of, not to mention likely unconstitutional. So I predict if there's a conviction, President Trump and his team will appeal, and I predict that they'll probably win on appeal, as difficult as that may be in the New York legal system. The other scenario is if President Trump wins and he's found not guilty, I predict, actually, I don't know. I don't know what the state of New York and what Alvin Bragg will do, whether they would possibly appeal. I think at that point, my hope is that they'll just move on and realize this was just yet another attempt, another failed attempt, just like we've seen in Colorado, right, with the attempt to remove him from the ballot there. This is just another attempt to remove President Trump from the ballot in November that failed. Because let's be really clear about what's happening here. Every dollar that President Trump spends on legal fees, every day that he spends tied up in court, is money and time that he cannot spend campaigning. And that is exactly what the Biden administration and what the far left wants to see happen, because they know they can't beat him in a fair fight at the ballot box. So their best bet is to keep him from the ballot box. And that's what this is really about. This is about distraction. The Biden administration has had failure after failure, failure to secure the border, failure to fix the economy, failure to get crime under control in this country, failure to keep gas prices, milk prices, right, food prices down under control. But they don't want anybody to talk about that. They want people to talk about what we are talking about right now, which is this trial and this prosecution of President Trump. And they know that every time we talk about the trials, it's time that can't be spent talking about Biden's failures. And I think that's all part of the plan. And so if President Trump wins, which he should, they should find him not guilty, then there's a part of me that suspects they'll just move on and they'll just find something else to throw at him. And he'll probably beat that too. I think they're all tied together, right? Not necessarily in a formal legal sense, because they're separate proceedings, clearly. But I do believe from just from in the political sense, they're all tied together, right? That, as I just laid out, it's all part of an orchestrated effort to keep President Trump from being able to be on the offensive on the campaign trail, and it's to keep him on the defensive and tied up in courtrooms. And so I think if there is an acquittal in New York, then we might see the efforts in Georgia and elsewhere ramp up. If there's a conviction in New York and an appeal, then they might take a wait and see approach. I do predict, as I said, that at the end of the day, all of these cases will end inevitably in President Trump's favor, including the one that was just heard at the U.S. Supreme Court, right? The oral argument on the immunity case. I think after listening to those oral arguments, going into the arguments, I was sort of 50-50. I wasn't sure, and I was very curious to hear how the arguments played out. After listening to the arguments and hearing the justices' questions, and even though they usually keep their cards pretty close, I do think there's a good possibility that the justices will rule 6-3, maybe it'll be 5-4 in favor of President Trump. Will they say that he's absolutely immune, that no president can ever be prosecuted for anything? I don't think they'll go that far. I think what they'll do is say that Jack Smith was very he was not cautious and careful with how he brought this case forward and attempted to prosecute President Trump. This needs to go back either to the Court of Appeals or the District Court, and they need to figure out, of all the things that you're alleging President Trump did that you want to prosecute him for, which of those were official acts and which of those were acts that were undertaken in his private capacity as a private citizen. And you need to distinguish those. Well, I think that the amount of time that it will take to untangle all that and figure that out, that's going to run out the clock. And we will be very, very close to November by the time they figure that out. And by then it'll be too late. And so again, I think President Trump will ultimately prevail in the Supreme Court case, in New York, in Georgia, in Florida, and anywhere else where they try to, where they try to quote unquote get him.